We're back on our program, Jones and Company, and we're speaking with Mr. Jeffrey Lloyd. Mr. Lloyd, before we went on a break, we spoke a lot about the past in terms of your journalistic career, in terms of the conditions that really made the environment at that time. Do you believe that your journalistic career has prepared you for everything that has come after that? You've been an educator, you've been a cabinet minister, minister of education, you're an attorney at law. Do you think that those 5 W's and 1 H, right, has helped you in terms of putting together a perhaps more consistent, coherent sense of the world around you?
It certainly has helped, no question about it. My journalistic training in university was quite intense because it was quite intense, but no question about it. But Mr. Jones, I've always had a curious mind, always. I always want to learn more, and so on. So, absolutely, there's no question that journalism has, and I consider myself still to be a journalist. I see and read extensively. I decry the state of journalism in the world, not just here in the Bahamas, because it has no longer become journalism. It's difficult now to find what you might consider true journalistic expressions, which we discussed, 5 W's and an H, because everything now is driven by opinions, okay? And someone is somewhere in the throes of somebody's ideology and representative of that. And you have now the conservative or the liberal, okay? Nobody is bringing, or let's say only a few, if any, are bringing the facts and letting you decide without it being colored by their opinions, and usually opinionated by persons who prepare or appear to be credible sources of authority. The director of this and the founder of that and so on. And the average person is going to say, well, oh, you're the director, you must know what you're saying. Right. And then since, again, a lazy public, they're going to accept what is said on the radio or the television pretty much as sacred without themselves going and doing any kind of homework and investigating many other sources to make sure that what is being reported by Mr. Jones or Jeffrey Lloyd or whomever is in fact the truth. Add to that, in the last 30 years, the rise of social media. And so now you have young people and us, who is telling the truth? What are the facts? Okay? Right. Now you have a rare society in which a certain toxicity of information, disinformation, alternative facts, you remember that? Right. Now appear to be genuine sources of information. There is big confusion out there, big confusion. And the canons of journalism, I think, have been diluted significantly in the modern era. And I call the modern era, say, from 1992, where you could not take it to the bank, what you read or what you hear, as we attempted, your father and I, in our day. We dare not go without having be assured that what we are saying is true, accurate, and that it's of a benefit to the people there. And if there was an opinion, it was sectioned in the newspaper in a way that you know it's an opinion. It isn't now wafted its way into the news as if it is news or it is fact, when in truth it is your opinion.
Right.
So,
and I think I read, it might have been in your editorial or another one that I read in the Bahama Journal this morning, but a famous catchphrase of Mr. Wendell Jones from Jones and Company, I think it was Jones and Company, and it's, you can't change history.
Yes, yeah.
And I think a lot of times journalists have to be reminded of that. Do you believe, Mr. Lloyd, that in our country, and we could talk about the rest of the world, but here in the Bahamas, in this little country of about 400,000 people, do you believe we have agenda journalists here in our country?
A what, sir?
Agenda journalists.
Gender journalists?
Agenda. Well, pushing a specific agenda.
I wouldn't go that far, but I would say that unfortunately in the journalistic field, people don't remain long enough to become sufficiently seasoned, who have an understanding of history, and who can then place whatever they are writing in context. One. Two, I think the expression of journalism today is unfortunately a business environment where you are given a story and you have to report that story for the next production or the next publication or the next newscast and so on. You don't really have time to dig in and to really do the research you need to do in order to produce something that the Bahamian people can really bite itself into. Thirdly, yes, there have been, in the modern times, more females in the profession, okay? And even they don't stick around, all right? Now, naturally, you expect that ZNS is going to carry the agenda of the day. Naturally, in my time, you expect that the Tribune was going to be anti-government no matter what they did, which I think, again, is not journalism. It can't be all bad, nor can it be all good, okay? Some question about where is the Nassau Guardian, okay? Some even would question where is the Bahama Journal, although I think despite his political orientation in whatever way it may appear, I think Wendell has tried to come down the middle with whatever information he has. I listen to you from time to time. You seem to be fearless, like your father, in presenting the information, and then you respond without seeking to color one way or the other your leaning, biases, whatever, and we all have them. So I don't think, Mr. Jones, that you can, in this 21st century, you can ignore the fact that everybody has some proclivity which seeps through their reporting, their analysis, and sometimes pronounced in a way that is difficult to hide. Yeah.
Right. And when we think about it, Mr. Lloyd, it must be a lot of things as a journalist, and especially as one of those persons from the old guard in terms of that generation of journalists, many of them who have now, unfortunately, some of them passed away, and some of them who've just completely moved on to retirement or what have you. Has there been anything lost in terms of journalism in the Bahamas by them coming off of the scene?
Yes, man. Yes. Again,
you must find a lot of the things you hear and see incomprehensible.
And lacking the depth that, my children in their 30s and 40s need to be able to get. When you talk about a newspaper of record, you should be able, 150 years from now, to go into the archives and after several editions of that newspaper in consecutive weeks, get a picture of what the Bahamas was like. It is not just a simple story about Mr. Jones having this or that without some context as to what this all means. And that context, continues throughout this, the successive edition. Absolutely. I mean, you had, Gladstone Thurston for the Tribune. Tremendous. Arthur Folks used to work for the Tribune. Okay? Again, I remember Darrell Miller for the Nassau Guardian and others. Ed Bethel is now, gone and so on. These are people who could explain why the House is being prorogued at this time because of incidences 5 years ago or 17 years ago or back in the 1950s and so on, because they were around. And not only that, they were students of history. You could talk to your father and he could explain to you why certain things are being done in the House of Assembly or decisions are being taken. These are not out of the thin air. These are matters which have a certain historical antecedent, you see. So no question about it. This is why I say you don't have enough journalists who stay in the field long enough, 30 years, 40 years, and who can bring a seasoning to a newsroom or to, such that context can be extracted. And that story now carries with it a depth that is enlightening for your people.
Right. I saw in the past, and I never consider myself to be a journalist, Mr. Lloyd. If someone considers me to be, I guess this would be on-the-job training. But professionally, I'm not. But there are a few issues, just as a citizen, just as a person who, and I try to listen and watch every newscast from every news outlet in the Bahamas that I can. I try to read as much as I can to be informed about the issues that we have to ventilate on issues of the day on a daily basis. And I remember being, I was shocked to find that there would be a reporter who would ask the commissioner of police in a press conference, who is this member of parliament that is about to be charged with rape? And he said, or after he refused to say who, and was, I guess, asked a follow-up question, he said, well, everybody knows who we're talking about, right? And then there was even a further instance where there was a police officer most recently who was the head of the Criminal Investigations Department, probably one of the most important police officers in the Bahamas, who was put on administrative leave pending some very, very serious allegations. And we're being told that, every time that we ask for an update on that investigation, the can is kicked down further and further and further. And there seems to be all sorts of ambiguities in terms of where this person is, what they're doing, what will be the outcome of the situation. And I know that those sorts of answers and explanations could not be given to a Wendell Jones or a Jeffrey Lloyd or any of these journalists that we talk about.
Or if it is given, it would be highlighted in such a phenomenally stark way that the one who gave that answer would be almost compelled to provide the answers, because Mr. Jones would just rip you to shreds on Jones and Company.
But following those exchanges, I read the newspaper and watch the TV, and then I see the same thing. I see that there are journalists who will report a story about a member of parliament accused of rape or a high official accused of a crime and still leave the name of that individual out of the story.
For fear.
For fear.
Yeah. Now, I didn't say beginning in our conversation that the victimization or the fear of victimization has left us completely. There are some who, immune to whatever attempts or threats would be, but there are some who are intimidated and threatened by even a perception that they may be victimized. And you imagine the Minister of National Security, my beloved friend, saying that there is no guarantee that the report on the Royal Bahamas Police Force will not be made public. I mean, how is that possible? Right. The premier law enforcement agency of our country, in whom we must repose a certain trust and credibility, and is being investigated by foreign investigators. And the public does not have the right, the absolute right, to know what that report says about our police force, not your police force, not the government's police, our police force. I just can't imagine. But I haven't heard or seen in any write-ups that, matters of this nature. Again, these are the kinds of things that a journalist, I'm not saying that the public or the politician may not say these things, but the way that will be reported and the kind of editorial that will be put on that particular politician or whomever it is, the public will kind of come to a clear understanding. Because you see, your editorial has to be grounded in the jurisdiction of facts first. Then you offer your opinion. You can't just spew out of thin air whatever it is that you think or feel. You lay out the facts, and then you add your deductions to it. And that's how the public becomes, again, enlightened. And they will begin to trust that your opinion is sound. May not agree with it, but at least I could see why you have come to that conclusion. Where's that today, sir?
I see a lot of articles, no facts, but thinly veiled opinions.
Yes. And this is, and you see, and maybe we are to blame, your father and myself, because we left the profession maybe too early, and we didn't stick around to really do the training of others as we ought to have done. But you see, this is why the bereft of seasoned veteran, I remember Mr. Ingram and Mr. Davis, cub reporters going to ask him questions. You don't send a cub reporter to the Prime Minister.
Right.
You send a news editor.
Right.
You send a seasoned senior reporter who can put questions to him based on a variety of information that they have, both in terms of what he has previously said or what their party have promised, or facts about their party and instances of the country previous to this interview.
Right.
But a cub reporter can't do that. Okay? Again, this is the failing. And even if you have seasoned journalists in these newsrooms, do they really have the time to train?
Right.
The question is, do they really? And I speak about my beloved sister Candida Dames. She's been around for a while. I helped train her at Love 97. Okay? Does she really, with the pressure of getting that news article out by 8:30 tonight, and it's coming on my desk, and I've got about 12 of these stories, and I've got to make sure, and so on. When does she have time to really train a reporter and coach that reporter? She does, and I'm sure, a very good job with the time that she has, but when can you do that? When does that reporter really could take a year off? I was watching a news story last night that they were investigating for a year of these scams out of Ghana and taking people's money and so on. When do you have a time? When do you have a year to invest in a story, okay? Right. And bring something that, again, really is enlightening and elucidating to the Bahamian people.
Right.
That's the nature of our journalistic environment today, sir.
Do you think, Mr. Lloyd, that some of the daytime talk shows have contributed to that? And you talk a lot about, we talked before we started our program about the legendary Mike Wallace and that sort of in-your-face brand of journalism. You talk about the talk shows, and the role of the host can change sometimes, I find, from a pastor trying to give hope to the nation to, and sometimes a fireman trying to put out fires and get to the very root of a problem or an issue. And in some cases, you're a barber. It's who's next for haircut and shave. And, sometimes a lot of, I think, the tense moments on radio between people, some of the rowing and arguing, and that has even led to some of this gotcha type of journalism, where the only time people are interested in a story is when it's something negative about somebody, not when it's uncovering something that would be helpful to the entire country, but when it's humiliating or embarrassing to somebody.
Well, unfortunately, they say in the news business that negative sells. Nobody is interested in the fact that Bahamas Air landed safely 4 times today from their various trips around the Family Islands and the United States. But if the tire blew on one of those landing experiences, that's big time story. And it goes to the fundamental nature of us about self-preservation. Obviously, we want to know if we could trust Bahamas Air to fly because, oh God, they had a tire blowout. But I'll say this to Mr. Jones. This is another show, but I have a lot of concern about the quality of hosting on these talk shows, because I don't think you hold your callers sufficiently to account. They can spew all kinds of nonsense as facts, or they think as facts or opinions, without challenging them, okay? There was a man, I was in the barber shop once, and he said that, they have X number of pedophiles locked away in Fox Hill Prison. I said, based on what report? He said, oh man, that's just my opinion. I said, well, it could be your opinion, but based on what? He said, well, prove that it isn't. I said, no. You assert it, you prove. You say it, so on and so. They do this on the radio, and you talk show hosts, you let them get away with these opinions that, again, just foolishness, just nonsense, okay? I don't think that you serve the Bahamian. I'm not pointing at you as the person, but I don't think that you serve the Bahamian people as an instrument of information by doing that. I don't think so. And that goes to whoever you have on the show, whether it's an in-person guest, somebody on the telephone, or somebody who's calling in. And they're just spewing just pure nonsense. You're entitled to your opinion, but that don't mean anything, because everybody has an opinion, like everybody has an elbow, okay? They are facts, which are immutable. They don't change. That's the reality of life. And anybody who comes against those, as far as you are as a host is concerned, you have to correct them on the spot. You can't wait for them to carry that on and nothing is said, number one. Number two, you also have to be careful of allowing people to put you in danger by libeling and slandering folks. Okay? And I've heard that on the radio. You can't say Jeff Lloyd is a thief with no evidence, no proof. And you can't even suggest that I am a thief or I believe he is a thief. Based on what? Was I charged before the courts? Was I convicted of something? Where? Okay? And you all would allow that and have allowed it to go unchallenged. I think that's a disservice to the Bahamian people. And it's a danger to your organization because you know you could be sued. All right?
Right. Well, I think to some shows, and it becomes very, I have to say, it becomes very difficult in many cases because you don't know what a person is going to say.
But you have to listen.
But
you have to be attentive. You can't be listening, you know. I did talk shows for almost 30 years.
In terms,
you got to listen.
You're absolutely right, Mr.
You have to listen. You have to keep, especially because you could get in trouble.
In terms of the responsibility of making corrections and correcting the narrative when somebody calls and spews something that may or may not be correct, or they have no sort of proof or no sort of backup for that. Yes, you're absolutely right. And in terms of the utility to the public, there is none in spreading lies and rumors on radio. But what effect do you think social media plays on that? The fact that the time it takes us perhaps to write a story or to put graphics in a television cast, and somebody takes an amateur video on their cell phone or writes, in some cases, something that is patently false, and just disseminates it around the country in the blink of an eye.
Social media is a powerful tool which can be for good or for evil. And unfortunately, it's used for the latter, unfortunately. There are, of course, today news organizations that, use it prolifically. They don't wait for the 7 p.m. newscast or the next morning's newspaper. They are now on top of that story and they put it out there. But the part of it that is evil is you don't know what is true information. You don't know what is fact. You don't, and you have no context. Do you know whether this is true? And the day of AI, is it really Mr. Johnson who said that? Is it really? Or is it, some AI-generated version of Mr. Johnson speaking and all that stuff? So it's up to these organizations, your organization and others, to use for the benefit of goodness, okay, for truth, for levity, for authenticity and integrity, and of course by labeling it such, Love 97 and so on. And even that, you can't be guaranteed is authentic because the scammers around the world are now become extremely sophisticated. They could take your logo and make it appear as if it is coming from the true Love 97. So social media has been phenomenal in one respect. I mean, I use it all the time, but it is also, it's a poison that can seriously contaminate the young mind because they don't have the benefit of seasoned, mature judgment to siphon facts from opinions, nonsense, foolishness, humor, and so forth. They are like sponges that just absorb whatever, and their minds become contaminated to the extent and the degree that now you see all kinds of mental issues that are creeping in to our society, especially among the young people, in part, not exclusively, but in part, because of the prevalence of social media.
Right, and I think given the fact that the industry that we talk about, the underpinning of that, as we've been talking about so far, is a tenacious pursuit of veritas, of truth. In addition with that, you have the fact that Bahamians are expected to make decisions that are precipitated upon them, receiving information that allows them to make the best possible decision, whether it be politically at the polls every 5 years, or whether it be on which gas station has the cheapest fuel. But the fact is that I think, Mr. Lloyd, and you may agree with me, that given the elusivity of truth that we see, right? Not only in the world, but specifically in the country, because as you mentioned, hackers, and there's a high level, in some case, of just mischief makers. The Bahamians are in trouble if they won't be able to decipher what is true and what is not.
Or have the initiative to go and find it for themselves. Because, again, in this hand, you have an instrument that is in touch with the world, certainly in your own country. And you can go for yourself and really find out what is going on. But now, where are you going to get that information? Is it from a newspaper report that itself does not have sufficient context?
Right.
Okay? So you're still deprived of the benefit of certain authenticity or enlightenment or value and all that, so on and so forth. You know, you have got to now today be a most curious. See, in this 21st century, it's not good enough to know. You now need to know how. And you have to be your own student and not wait for some other entity to come and give you information, because it's available to you. And it's the beautiful, but also the quite burdening thing that is happening in the world today is the information is changing so fast. What one believed to be true 15 years ago may not be so right now. So you cannot rest on your laurel and become complacent and plateau and say, well, I have achieved the master's degree now, I have gotten all the information I need. You got to keep learning. You have to continue to study to be, as the Bible says, to be approved. So I say this to my children all the time, and they themselves have observed it. Where do you find the truth? Where? You know? And it's very, very difficult. Very difficult. But it still does not excuse you, Mr. Jones, as a citizen of this country, of informing yourself about the issues that impact your life, the life of your community, and the life of a nation. Right. You must, when you sit down to decide what you are going to do, put all of that in context, because whatever you decide has a ripple effect throughout your life and the life of your children. Right. That vote that you cast, whenever you cast it, is a vote for the future. The past is gone. Okay? And you better be careful about your decision, because it's going to impact your children and your grandchildren. And they are critical to the development of this country, because this is now their country, and they are going to eventually take the reins of leadership in some form or fashion. And what conditioning will they bring to their decision making, which would have been inaugurated by you, that conditioning. Okay? So this is a huge responsibility. This is why, you know, the Bible said, when I was a child, you know, I thought it, but when I became a child. So you can't approach this as in a childish and an immature and a puerile way. You have to have a sense of purpose and meaning that impacts and affects your life, yes, and those who are affiliated, attached, and related to you.
Right. And the last question, or almost out of time, Mr. Lloyd, but the last question I want to ask, as we also celebrate this month the 37th anniversary of the Bahama Journal, and just as I was listening to you and thinking about some of the things that you've said, it dawned on me, what is the importance of journalism in the country and journalists knowing the aspirations of Bahamians and people in the public. And it made me reflect on the motto of the Bahama Journal.
Quo Vadis.
Quo Vadis Bahamas, which is Latin. The English translation asks the question, where goest thou, Bahamas?
Yes, sir. And it's your responsibility and mine to help chart that way by providing timely, accurate, and in some instances, deeply prospective information for the benefit of our people if we are going to be in this field. And even if we are not, in whatever sphere we exist, it is to enlighten and to invite to life the people that we are, again, related to, affected by, or who will be affected by us. Because, Mr. Jones, I always maintain that the Bahamas is a small country with big country problems. Okay? We cannot afford for any citizen to be uninformed. And to exercise that information in a judicious and a wise way. We can't. We know that there will be. But we should be about the business of ensuring that more and more people have the benefit of what we do on an everyday basis. When I was a talk show host, I spent hours researching. I never came to my show just to wing it. When I listen to some today, that's basically all they are doing. Hours, me and my producer, working on and getting information, because I considered it a sacred responsibility that if it goes out into that public domain, it better be the truth, it better be accurate, and if it is my opinion, it has to be grounded on some facts. Right. And you may argue with my conclusion, but you can't argue with the facts. And that's another thing your daddy used to always say. You can't argue with the facts. Right. Can't argue with the facts. Right. Yeah.
Well, Mr. Lloyd, we've come to the end of our program today, and thank you for joining me in the last hour. The conversation that we have, I think, has been beneficial to the country, and certainly we talked a lot about Love 97, about the 30th anniversary, some of those featured programs, and where we've gotten, or how we've gotten to where we are today. Thank you for joining me.
Again, Mr. Jones, congratulations, and congratulations to you. You have stepped into some huge shoes here in the station, and on Jones and Company. I watch you all the time, and you're doing a very, very good job, and just keep at it. Keep learning, keep studying. Watch the ones in the field that you have respect for and who are doing a decent job, but keep going. Don't become discouraged one way or the other. If you make a mistake, own up to it, but keep going. And so with people like you, we've got a bright future in journalism. With some others, it would be best for them to seek other shelters of profession.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd.
My pleasure.
I appreciate that. And to you, our viewing and listening audience, thank you for tuning in to our program, Jones and Company, this evening. See you next Sunday night. Thank you.